Cities get warned in time. And as summer ice retreats, Arctic routes can cut days to weeks off some Asia-Europe trips. Greenland sits beside the gateways. So when Trump said, "Buy Greenland," the world laughed. But U.S. strategists didn't, because America has tried this before.
We don't take Greenland, Russia or China will, and I'm not letting that happen.
This is a 100-year obsession, and it's back for one reason. Greenland is becoming the point for defense, minerals, and trade. And the most dangerous part isn't a purchase, it's the quiet version, where influence moves through money, ports, contracts, and dependency until sovereignty becomes a formality. In the next lines, I'll show you the 3 proof points behind this and why the takeover doesn't need an invasion. Trump wasn't the first American leader to consider Greenland as strategic real estate. After the U.S. bought Alaska in 1867, U.S. officials explored expanding Arctic reach, Greenland included, because the logic was already clear. Control the North Atlantic approaches. Control what moves between continents. Fast forward to 1946. World War II has ended, but Washington is already staring at the next conflict. The new flight path of fear isn't across oceans, it's over the pole. So President Harry Truman's administration made Denmark a formal offer for Greenland. $100 million in gold. Not bonds, not promises. Gold. Denmark says no. But the United States doesn't leave. It changes tactics. If it can't buy the house, it will rent the keys to the most important rooms. In 1951, Denmark and the U.S. signed a defense agreement that granted America long-term military access. And from that moment on, Greenland becomes something the Pentagon treats less like a distant island and more like a fixed component of North American defense. If you want to understand why Greenland matters, stop looking at flat classroom maps. Look at a globe or a naval chart. Here's the reality. Between Russia's northern bases and the open Atlantic sits a corridor NATO planners obsess over, the GIUK gap, Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom. If you're a Russian submarine captain trying to reach the Atlantic, this is one of the most practical points. And for NATO, it's the Western Wall that helps keep the Atlantic from becoming a free-for-all. Now add a simple military truth. Distance equals reaction time. And Greenland compresses distance in a way few places on Earth can. Greenland's location lets the U.S. and its allies see farther, track earlier, and respond faster, because it sits almost perfectly between North America and Europe, facing the Arctic approaches. But that's still just the gate, because Greenland also hosts the eye. At the top of Greenland sits the northernmost U.S. military installation on Earth, Patuxent Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base. And its job is blunt: missile warning. The U.S. Space Force's 12th Space Warning Squadron operates the upgraded early warning radar there, part of America's missile warning and attack assessment network. This is the radar that watches the polar routes, where ballistic missiles would travel, because the shortest path between superpowers is often straight over the top of the world. If you lose reliable access to that radar, if it's delayed, restricted, compromised, your warning window shrinks. And that's why minutes wasn't poetry. It was doctrine. Owning Greenland would remove diplomatic friction forever. No negotiations for upgrades. No hesitation for deployments. No uncertainty over permissions. And that's exactly why the island stays on the list. But military logic is only half the story, because the next industrial era is also buried under ice and buried under politics. Now we get to the prize most people don't see: materials. Modern power runs on weird ingredients: rare earth magnets, precision guidance components, high-performance electronics. And here's the strategic nightmare. China doesn't just mine critical minerals. It dominates processing. The International Energy Agency has warned that China's dominance is even greater in separation and refining for rare earths, around 9/10 of global production in those stages. That matters because even when minerals are mined elsewhere, refining is where the bottleneck lives. It's where supply chains can be squeezed. Greenland contains significant mineral potential, enough that it's become a symbol in the wider de-risk from China conversation. But Greenland's mineral story has a catch: politics and environment. One of the most high-profile rare earth projects, Kvanefjeld, became a national flashpoint because of uranium content and fears of radioactive waste. In 2021, Greenland passed a law banning development of deposits with uranium concentrations above a threshold, effectively halting that project. That's the trap for Greenland. It needs revenue to stand on its own, but the fastest paths to revenue can threaten the very land and identity people are trying to protect. And while this debate plays out, the world is also eyeing another jackpot the Arctic hints at: oil and gas. The U.S. Geological Survey's Circum-Arctic Assessment concluded the Arctic may hold about 30% of the world's undiscovered gas and 13% of undiscovered oil. But in Greenland, extraction is not just a technical problem. It's a cultural and environmental one. So the real question becomes, if Greenland can't easily monetize resources without dividing itself, how does it fund independence? That answer pulls us into the next act. Greenland has home rule, its own parliament, and a long-running independence movement. But it also has a hard financial reality. Denmark provides Greenland an annual block grant of roughly 3.9 billion Danish kroner, about $500 to $600 million, depending on exchange rates, roughly 20% of GDP, and more than half of the public budget. That single transfer funds hospitals, schools, infrastructure, public salaries, daily stability. So independence becomes a math problem. You can declare sovereignty, but can you pay for the state the next morning? This is where the Buy Greenland headline misses the modern play, because you don't have to buy a country to control its options. You can become its unavoidable partner. If Greenland ever moves toward independence, it will need replacement financing, investment, and security guarantees. And that's where superpowers compete, quietly, through consulates, projects, contracts, and long-term access. China openly frames Arctic routes as an opportunity. In its official Arctic policy, China calls for building a polar Silk Road and encouraging enterprises to participate in infrastructure construction along Arctic shipping routes. So Greenland becomes the kind of place where funding offers aren't just money, they're leveraging. And in January 2026, this is no longer theoretical. Reuters reported the Trump administration has discussed payments as part of a plan to persuade Greenlanders to align with the United States. Meanwhile, Greenland's government has publicly rejected any takeover, emphasizing that defense should remain within NATO's framework. So the contest is sharpening: hard power threats in public, soft power and money in the background. Which brings us to the newest and most revealing layer. Until you realize it's how the world actually changes hands. Not with flags, with paperwork. In late 2025, reporting connected to Danish outlets described how an investor group registered in the US, structured through an LLC, took stakes in small Greenlandic companies, raising debate inside Greenland about foreign influence and political proximity. One major concern in these situations isn't whether the investment is legal, it's whether it creates pressure points. Who gets access to the foreign investors' network? Who gets the contracts? Who becomes dependent on the next funding round? And who sits close enough to power that a business partnership becomes political gravity? This is the modern playbook. Build relationships, fund key sectors, embed in logistics, become the partner no one can easily replace. And because Greenland is small, about 57,000 people, network effects hit harder. A single project can matter. a single investor can loom. The point isn't that every investment is a conspiracy. The point is that in a geopolitical tug-of-war, the line between development and positioning gets thin. And now, the world is watching that line in real time. The final accelerant is the simplest. The Arctic is opening. Arctic Council tracking shows the number of unique ships entering the Arctic Polar Code area increased 37% from 2013 to 2023, about 500 more ships. And the total distance sailed in that area increased 111% over the same period. More ships mean more demand for what Greenland barely has today: deep water ports, repair yards, fuel, emergency response, communications, navigation support. In other words, infrastructure. And infrastructure is where influence is built. If Denmark can't fund it, and the US won't fund it, someone else will offer. So when you hear Greenland, don't just picture ice. Picture the next set of logistics nodes on tomorrow's shipping map. Because whoever helps build the Arctic's real-world plumbing, ports, runways, comms, doesn't need to own the territory to shape its future. So why does the US want Greenland? Not because it needs more land, not because it wants snow, because the map is changing. Greenland is the cork in the bottle, a shield for missile warning and Atlantic defense, a battery of future materials in a world where refining is concentrated, and a toll booth candidate as Arctic shipping expands. Denmark sees Greenland as a responsibility and constitutional reality. Greenland sees Greenland as identity and an unfinished future. China sees roots and opportunity and calls it a polar Silk Road. And Washington sees a gap it can't afford to leave open. In January 2026, Greenland's leaders said clearly it's not for sale. But the pressure isn't only about sales. It's about alignment. And in the Arctic, alignment is built the way it's built everywhere else now, through security, through money, and through the slow architecture of dependency. And what the ice reveals isn't just land.